What's up, everyone? I'm Dimitar, and I'm a London-based SaaS entrepreneur and operator. I've been in the talent acquisition space for the better part of a decade, but spent the last couple of years building machine learning forecasting software for sales. After a brief hiatus, I'm back in the talent acquisition space, having recently joined Handshake, the world's largest early talent network, as head of EMEA. In this podcast series, I catch up with some of my old industry friends and thought leaders to discuss the latest trends in the emerging talent space. I speak to some of our employer partners who provide tactical advice on how to best identify, attract, and engage early talent. And lastly, I chat to some of my colleagues here at Handshake, giving you a behind-the-scenes peek into how the world's fastest-growing edtech company is being built. Okay, well, let's do it. We're live now.
Hey, Dimitar. So I'm Dan. I work at Capgemini, global technology consultancy, and I've been in the early careers space for the last decade across a couple of RPOs and also in-house at Capgemini, where I am now. And yeah, that's my thing, really. We're looking ahead to sort of 2021 and hiring more people next year.
Yeah, so just before I hit record, you said that you're expecting a record number of hires next year. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? So a lot of businesses have been affected in a negative way from COVID. You, on the other hand, as a technology consulting firm, are seeing this huge increase in applicants and also demand for hires. You want to kind of say a couple of words about this before we move on? Because it's an interesting thing to see, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think because we operate both in the public and private sector as a technology consultancy, some of the key activities that we work with the government, which would have been things around, Brexit and then shifts towards COVID and the campaigns that are linked to that. So Capgemini were responsible for launching the furlough campaign and website, which received some great praise from none other than Tim Berners-Lee on Twitter, who found it fascinating that a website with such traffic didn't crash. Ticketmaster is obviously, and some others like that normally crash when a band gets back together or, there's a big concert on. But to have that many 100,000 people use it on the same launch day and not break is pretty impressive, actually, in this day and age. So yeah, it's been a challenge for everybody, in all sectors, all walks of life. I think we'll count ourselves fortunate that we haven't been massively affected by COVID in the sense of work and being, at capacity and busy. It's probably just been a change of working environments and the types of projects that we're working on.
Yeah. And so one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about is a while back, you put out a list of, let's call it, pet peeves you have with early talent and recruitment processes in early talent, which got a lot of attention on LinkedIn. Lots of great points there. So I thought, in today's episode, we could quickly go through the list and kind of have you elaborate on some of the points. I don't know if you want me to, I've got it up here in front of me right now, so I can kind of start us off. It came out in 3 separate posts with anywhere from I think it was 2 to 3 points in each one. And so yeah, it would be great to if you remember them and it doesn't have to be in chronological order, but I guess I'm assuming, Dan, and correct me if I'm wrong, they kind of start with the thing that aggravates you the most to the things that kind of aggravated the least, or not necessarily. It'd be good to kind of go through the list anyway.
It wasn't in any kind of order, actually. It wasn't a ranking order. It was kind of things that either had kind of recurred back into my mind based on conversations or webinars I've been on, or talk to partners in the network, and then it reminded me. And I think there's so many of them that actually I've never thought of writing them down. I've just kind of almost accepted them over the last decade that, well, that's just how it works. And then I'm thinking, well, no, that's not what we've been doing, or that's not what I've seen them been doing, or why are they doing it like that? And I think this year, is particularly in the early careers market, and it's things like these calls as well, have shown quite and I think Steph mentioned it on the previous session, we've seen this market almost become quite tight knit. And this kind of COVID situation has brought a lot of different suppliers, partners, vendors, employers, training providers, etc., and obviously the student community together, particularly online. And I think it's not a particular dig at anybody or any company or any sector. It's just observational stuff over the years. It's as opposed to putting it into a comedy format and being a comedian, it's just me turning it into something which is easy to digest, and it's quite short and snappy. And if people agree, they agree and they call it out. If they don't agree, then I'm really keen to know why and how, because that way I'll learn as well.
Sure.
So it's in no particular order. It's just a bit of a brain dump here and there, but on a weekly format. Should
we dig into it then? Because again, there are quite a few really interesting points. I certainly agree with most of what you wrote there. So the first one that you posted was reliance on assessment / selection to find the best candidates, or over-reliance on this. Do you want to elaborate on this a little bit? We can unpack it.
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of a case where we see a lot of employers who think that to hire the best talent, you have to go out with a big, ship container with huge sort of trawling boats to grab as many fish as you can. And that way, if you put them into a machine or a factory line, it will produce the product at the end, and you know what that product needs to look like.
Yeah.
In a world of diversity, that's almost against the grain. It's a bit like, we know what we want to hire at the end, but actually, if you were to think about the attraction a bit more rather than the assessment selection bit, the ingredients you're putting into your meal, your masterpiece, is more varied and it's more relevant. And it's like going to a supermarket and just like supermarket sweep and just ramming everything into your trolley and thinking that's going to make a great meal. When actually, if you go in there with a pre-prepared list of ingredients and know where in the shop to go and find them, when you go to the checkout, guaranteed you're going to have a nice meal tonight.
Yeah, that's actually great. Yeah, true. And that's a great analogy. I haven't actually thought about it in sort of running across a supermarket with a trolley and shoving everything in it, only to then have to take out, and this sounds pretty crude, but ingredients that you don't need. Because if you think about it from a candidate standpoint as well, it's a waste, not just from a company standpoint in terms of resources and time and money spent, but also a huge waste of time for candidates who are not qualified in the first place, and they shouldn't have perhaps wasted their time applying to begin with, knowing that they wouldn't be a good fit.
Candidates could almost be that food wastage that go, it's in the cupboard, it's not been touched, and they're never going to use that ingredient, or you've made too much of that meal and you're just going to throw it in the bin, and it's that's the sort of the spillage and the leftovers. Actually, what you'll find is if you go in with that predefined list, your application to hire ratios will be much smaller, but you can determine how you get diversity. Diversity doesn't happen by putting them into a process. Like the process doesn't create diversity. If you've got basic ingredients for your meal, you can't build a Michelin star meal, right? And that's fairly simple logic and simple analogy, but it is true. I'm not claiming that it's something I've made up. It's just the basics of recruitment marketing. And that's what baffles me, and that's why I get frustrated, because it is so easy that it frustrates me that it's not adopted much more widely. There are others that do it extremely well, but there are a lot that don't.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? I've got my own theories about this, and I've debated and kind of discussed this with previous guests and friends and employer partners that we work with. But what's your opinion on this? Why do you think certain people do it, certain don't? And what is your view on this idea? Obviously, I had Johnny Campbell on the previous episode, and we spoke a lot about direct sourcing, and he put a very compelling case as to why direct sourcing is going to massively increase in early careers. But curious to hear your thoughts on it. Why such a discrepancy between people who get it right, you and Capgemini being a great example, and others who don't necessarily do it?
It could be down to resource and costs. It might be that their process is potentially outsourced, or they're reliant upon assessments because they may run in a cyclical recruitment cycle, so they hire maybe for just one month per year, but they do it in a short window, maybe over Q4, Q1, and therefore for them it's a cost effective and time efficient piece. And maybe recruitment of early careers talent is not as important maybe in their business. Maybe the numbers are so low, they don't dedicate enough resource to it. They don't have the budgets to perhaps do that. It might also be that actually the people leading or running and operating the recruitment process are quite lazy.
Okay.
And, as a human, we want to do things quick.
Yeah.
We want things individualized also. Well, doing it quick and getting from A to B as quick as possible sometimes removes that human and individualization for the candidate. And actually what you find at the end is your drop-off rates increase, or your loyalty of the candidate is removed. We know that a candidate who is pre-engaged at the attraction stage is more loyal at the latter stages. It's part of that marketing, consumerism life cycle. And they then become your advocates much more than the standard Joe Bloggs who applies from Indeed. The chance of them being an advocate or being part of your attrition figures is less likely than somebody who's been engaged with the long-term attraction game. So I think resourcing costs might be a reason. That reliance on the assessment process, maybe there's some science behind that. And, I'd also question whether that's absolutely true, particularly for those who adopt new processes and don't have the science to show what that means in 5, 7, 10 years time. Are those assessments online actually predicting how they perform in role? Or is it just to sift all the fish out of the net? Because that to me is what I see as a candidate. I see 100 roles, 10,000 applicants. Crazy, absolutely crazy. 94 applicants to one apprentice hire in the IT sector.
Wow.
94 people applying to one. In this current climate, I almost feel like youth unemployment and the mental state of some of those young people, it's almost better that there's maybe less opportunities for them to apply to than them feel like they have to go out and trigger happy every single role that's out there. I'm inundated with news stories on LinkedIn of young people who've applied for 764 roles in 3 months and got to 2 interviews. That must be mentally draining, and brand perception wise, it's pretty poor as well. For us, if you apply, we're trying to actually see if you can get through to the next stage, not to see if we can kick you out. And I think that's hopefully a positive thing for a candidate to experience.
100%. And on that note, one of the other points that you raised in one of those posts on LinkedIn was this idea of putting lots of hurdles for candidates in the recruitment process. And you kind of touched upon this, but it would be good to talk about this again from a candidate standpoint and how this potentially damages your employer brand. The idea, again, this goes back to this idea of having as many people apply and then introducing as many hurdles for them to trip over so you can sift out the unsuited candidates. Why is this, in your opinion, a bad approach? Historically, it has been, to be fair, it has been the way we have done graduate recruitment for a long time. I don't agree with it for sure, but it'd be nice to hear your thoughts around it and why this kind of, annoyed you, I suppose, for lack of a better term here.
Yeah, I think it's, I think I mentioned something like, we're not assessing these young people or people at entry level roles for to be a CEO or an MD, right? We're not putting them through 15 stage interview panels and board of directors and all sorts of things. We're talking about somebody who's coming into a role where their job is to ask all the questions because they have no answers, right? If they had the answers, if they had the experience, then they're being put into the roles at the wrong level. So I can understand where there's maybe a level of interviewing or a face-to-face panel or something like that happens at experience higher level and above, because the shortlist might be lower, the nicheness of what they need in the role, what they bring is maybe easier to identify differently to the next candidate, and therefore having a ratio of maybe 10, 12, 15 people apply for one role is sort of more doable in the experience hire space, because relevancy will apply. And if you're a bit more switched on later in your career, you'll know not to go for certain roles because you've got no chance. Or at entry level, and again, because of the climate, and it's back into being an employer's market rather than being a candidate market as it has been, people are just seeing any opportunity and applying to it. And part of that goes back to maybe how they're educated and how they're influenced and what content they're kind of consuming and what they're following and how they use their social feeds and things like that to determine where they're a fit and where they've got the best chance of actually being successful. But it just baffles me that employers are putting them through 5, 6, 8, sometimes 9 and 10 stages of a process to try and find them at the end. When actually you could turn that money and effort and time and fine tune your attraction, and you will, you don't find Burberry having a footfall the same as Primark, do you?
No,
you don't need to, because it's just being a bit more smart with what happens at the front of the funnel, and it will help you get what you need at the end. It's no more scientific than that.
Yeah, 100%. And on that note as well, touching on candidate experience, one of the other points you raised is this notion of auto rejections and where this comes into the recruitment process. It'd be good to talk a little bit about that as well and why this is not necessarily a good approach.
So generally in terms of the sort of the screening stage and then there not being a kind of a communication to them, and I saw something recently which was really interesting and probably is up for debate for wider adoption. It was from Rebecca Fielding, the MD at Grad Consult, and if you don't follow her, definitely worth a follow. Really,
we work closely with them. Yeah,
excellent. That was not a name drop. That was pure coincidence. So she put something out a few weeks back, which was to talk about some hints and tips in this sort of COVID world. And it was probably born from the fact that there was some negativity amongst young people about being auto-rejected, or not even being auto-rejected. There was just no response. They were just being ghosted.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in that. I know in the experienced hire space, there's a lot of talk about whether, in the advert, it's saying at the end, if you don't hear back in 2 weeks, assume you're rejected. I mean, that's just... It's like walking to a shop and customer service just like deserting you, and you're like, well, I want to buy this product, but there's no one to serve me. It's just like, what's the
loving
point in
the shop analogies, by the way. It's so on point.
There's no why even open the door to them in the first place? It's just brand wise, I wouldn't go back to that shop.
Yeah,
because I'm not guaranteed to get what I want to buy. Early careers wise, I think there's got to be communications at every step. And there's another layer, another conversation about the tone and the delivery of that. But I think, from a candidate care perspective, from a youth and employment advocacy perspective, from a general personal brand and consumer brand perspective, it's what they deserve. Individual feedback is where it becomes a little bit complicated, and I think that to an extent is something which we've seen feedback on, not about our own process, but in comparison to other processes where they may have been to a stage of the process face to face or online, and they've been given some feedback which is actually deemed to be individualistic, but it's been pumped out automated. And therefore, actually, what they've tried to do is be authentic. And by giving them something generic, it's almost removed all of the authenticity and had the opposite effect, because they don't know whether to trust it or not. Having feedback post-assessment centre to let you know whether you've got the role or not is one thing. To know why you've got the role is often overlooked as well.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just rejection.
You need to know why you've been offered a role. Because we need to know and tell you what your development areas are as well. That we've got your training plan in place, and we know that you've not quite got that there, but we're going to work on that. That helps to give you that kind of ribbon on the present. Really, it's that we want you, but this is why we want you. We're quite a curious species, so we need to know why.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this point about increase number of applications post COVID was something that Johnny spoke about during the last episode, and I think the number he threw out was 4x increase in number of applications, which obviously puts a lot of pressure on internal teams to get back to candidates. The point you're making, and he said a lot of companies they work with, and this is certainly something we see on our end, have basically decided that instead of damaging the brand and having a poor candidate experience, it actually makes a lot more sense to basically start reaching out to candidates directly instead of posting. So that was kind of interesting to hear him talk about. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, so, we kind of covered a lot about what doesn't work with the current process, and areas of improvement, but it'd be really good to hear what you guys have done at Capgemini over the last couple of years, and particularly in the last few months post-COVID, because obviously the landscape has changed significantly, and how those changes that you have implemented, if any, have affected the recruitment process.
Yeah, so to just linking into Johnny's point, I think the 4X is probably what you'd see organically. I think with our take on it is that we've capitalized on this opportunity to make sure that we have become, that we've acknowledged that those young people are looking for content and some advice and steer, and we've ran 50 plus different events during COVID online, to I guess educate them a little bit, not just about Capgemini, but the tech sector and opportunities, and just play our little part really in giving them something to something to as a call to action for themselves. What that's given us is obviously probably 2, 3, maybe even 4 times at periods uptake in registration of interest organically. So where we'd normally see maybe a couple of hundred a month registering interest for our different programs and roles, and we're not a consumer brand, that's going towards 350, 400 a week. So all of a sudden you're going to find 5, 6, 7, 8,000 people who've said, hey, I want to work for you, that we've not actually had to spend a penny on. What you do with them obviously is more important than just as important. So the conversion rates is great for us because we're actually enabling us as a team to support the business on quite some reactive recruitment, and the reactive recruitment is happening thicker and faster at the moment because of the almost other side of COVID, where they're trying to get people onto projects and client work is being won, and we're having to not go out 6 months in advance for a graduate developer. We're having to go 6 weeks, sometimes 6 days, and they got to start next month. And that's tough, particularly in the tech sector where there's a skills gap. Actually, there's enough out there at entry level. I don't know how companies are still not filling tech roles. Again, different webinar, different day. But essentially, utilizing that registration of interest, it allows us to deploy and get that volume that you need, but not just volume, it's the relevancy and the engagement levels of that volume. So we could get maybe 2 weeks worth in one day. But it's 2 weeks worth of maybe 3 or 4 times the relevance of the normal 2 week organic period. That's why our roles don't end up on lots of job boards. Sometimes geographically or maybe timeframes mean that we have to post roles out. But generally, if you come into our register interest pool or you're programmatically advertised to, which has been a real big success for us, you can get exactly who you need in your pipeline. And that's the aim, isn't it? To get potential hireable people at the application stage. Not make them hireable by putting them through a process.
100%. And you mentioned programmatic advertising. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? Because I just want to make sure that everyone listening understands what you're talking about here, because it's a very neat approach.
I mean, programmatic ads have been around obviously for donkeys, for all sorts of things. It's why we see suits from ASOS on your Insta feed, or a female might see dress from New Look or whatever. Those dresses won't be on my feed, and those suits won't be on her feed. And obviously using that data through partnerships that we'd have in the early career space mean that we can go and target by social mobility, by gender, by courses, by course interest, by years of study, years of graduation, where they're studying, where they were living before, where they're living now, and really tailor those campaigns that you could have at any one point, dozens of miniature campaigns happening at a cost-effective rate, with click-through rates which are really strong versus a random sponsored ad which means nothing to you, which you'd normally go, I don't want to see that again, I'll press the 3 buttons and I'll remove the ad, or I'll report that it's not right for me. Whereas these ads are all right because they're linked to keyword searches, they're linked to if somebody's an English graduate who's been teaching themselves Code Academy on the side, well then we can pick that up. So it's not rocket science again. recruitment generally isn't, but knowing where to go and get those people is the $64,000 question, isn't it? Particularly if you've got the diversity lens on. Giving people the messages on the platforms at the time of the day in the tone of voice with the right call to action will give you the result. Again, another analogy around shops. You don't put a Waitrose in a lower socioeconomic part of the country. You won't sell any products.
I do like this for a number of reasons, but it really goes back to the first point that you made that if you want to produce a Michelin star recipe, you do need to be very deliberate about the ingredients that you put in. And what you describe here is the practical way of actually doing that in early recruitment, right? You actually go after the people that you want to hire instead of saying, hey, everyone come and apply here, and then we'll figure out what makes sense for us afterwards. So I love this for so many reasons. Cool. Going back to and again, I know this has been a topic that's been discussed again, but I thought it would be good to kind of wrap up on this. So any changes that you have noticed post in the last 6 to 3 months, and how the medically induced recession and just kind of the shock on the supply side initially affected your processes? Anything that you changed from last year? One of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of the show was that you're seeing a huge increase in candidates' numbers and demand, but I'm guessing that perhaps 6 months ago everything was in flux and you weren't even sure how many people you need to hire, right? Am I right, or am I completely off here?
Yeah, no, you're right. Some of our roles in some skill sets and some business units within our UK group is linked to certain sectors may have been affected. Other sectors were balancing that out. I think for us going forward, we've got a big year ahead. We're going to find probably 100 to 120% increase in roles across the graduates, apprentices, placements, interns, kickstart, and all sorts of entry routes. And I think I'm hoping what we will see across employers, and us being one of those, is that anyone that's kind of at that entry level situation, whether it's straight out of college, university, left university, dropped out, that's another story for another day. Rerouters, reskillers. In theory, it would be great if most employers had a bucket for them to go into. So if they applied to generally, I want to work for you, that there is an option at least to be screened against any one of 7, 8, 9, 11, whatever it might be. We've got options with refugees that come into our Careers Futures academies. We've got people who wanting to reskill their career and go into sort of our in-house academies. We've got apprentices, we've got graduate. I'm not going to say we're perfect by any stretch at all, but I think we're looking to make sure that hypothetically, candidate A wants to work for Capgemini or any employer, they can get through, hopefully, the next step of the application stage. Right. Then there may not be any rejected comms needed at that stage. However, the rest of that process is done on merit, around motivation, suitability. There might be some factors around locations and that kind of stuff. But that would be the dream.
Yeah, and so just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, so you're kind of thinking of, currently, I suppose, every graduate for a graduate role is measured by the same yardstick, so to speak. And what I'm hearing you say is, this is kind of incorrect. What we should do is basically put people in buckets, and someone might be a great fit for the traditional kind of graduate program, but there are other people who are equally great. They're just not applying for the right place. And it's on us as employers to create those buckets and upskilling and development opportunities for them to kind of flow into our pipeline of great talent.
I think so. If you've got a history graduate and they want to be a developer, there should be a route for them to be a developer. We've got a skills shortage, a skills gap. We're not doing enough about it. Similarly, if you've dropped out of uni, you haven't got the degree, but you've done a degree partly that's too much learning to be eligible for an apprenticeship. So you get auto rejected by providers and employers. Well, okay, maybe that's the academy model for them, because they've clearly got an interest in computer science. They dropped out because of personal reasons, health reasons, financial reasons, homesickness reasons, COVID reasons. You can't pin them and penalize people for things that have happened before. Some of those choices were out of their domain. we don't live in a linear world, really, if you think about it. What I studied at university versus what I do now.
Yeah.
I think it's just, that would be the dream, that an candidates are brought in to work for an employer because they believe in their values, they believe in their environmental stance, their ethics. They feel like that would be a place to work. And given we're working in a quite remote way at the moment, work and home become quite hard to differentiate for some people. So actually being able to be at home with an employer is quite important going forward, I think. So getting to a point where a young person, and generally, experienced hires as well, look at the brand and the employer they want to work for, and then there should be an opportunity for them to be, obviously they've got to go through some sort of selection. You can't just hand jobs out. It's not a charitable situation, of course, but I think it's that initial door shut on people, which is frustrating to watch happen out there for young people right now in the climate that it is. I was one of those people. I came out of uni in the last recession and doors were shut on voluntary work, and it was pretty tough. Nowhere near as tough now, but it wasn't nice. But you get around it. But you need employers to create those avenues. It's not just influencers and careers advisors and schools. Employers have a duty to make sure that there are enough talent pools for people to go into. Then they won't have a skills gap. Yeah.
And final thing for me. So you mentioned Grad Consult earlier. We it just so happens that, again, complete coincidence, but we ran an event with them the other day, catching up with some of our university partners, talking about the last 6 to 9 months, things that they learned. I mean, the entire university system is being flipped on its head post-COVID. So lots of opportunities to learn and grow and develop. And the same is true, obviously, for early talent in recruitment. So we heard a lot from university partners on what they learned and what the biggest takeaways from 2020 were. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would love to hear what the biggest learnings for you at Capgemini were, and what you would pass on to anyone in early talent to kind of look out for and implement in 2021.
I would say, without sort of going over the point we've made on this call too much, but I think maybe reevaluate your efforts in assessment and selection versus attraction. To manage that volume that you will organically get. You can do something about that without feeling like you've got to open the door to everyone to get diverse talent. Well, actually, you can do things targeted to make sure that you actually rebalance the imbalance. And that's, again, a topic for a different day. But I think make sure you evaluate, are you putting enough effort, resource, time, mechanics and science and data and planning into your front funnel, which will make things so much easier afterwards and more efficient and more cost effective. And I could go on about the benefits, but it's worth the upfront time and investment in that planning.
Amazing. Cool. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. As you said, we've touched on a bunch of things, and perhaps we would need a whole new episode to talk about them. But again, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.